On today's Film and Whiskey, we've got a full episode planned for you. We're trying 5 whiskeys from Hood River Distillers while we talk about a really unique listener question. After that, we're going to talk with the master distiller from Hood River, Joe O'Sullivan. That's all ahead on the Film and Whiskey podcast. Hey everybody, welcome into the Film and Whiskey podcast. I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And we are coming at you today with another special bonus episode.
Bonus episode.
Brad, it is the best kind of bonus episode. One where we
didn't prepare for.
There it is. One where we have very little to talk about, but very much to drink. So we have 5 whiskeys in front of us today, and we are going to drink all 5 of them.
In a row, like shot, and then review them.
It'd be kind of weird if I was like, we have 5 whiskeys in front of us and we're going to drink 4 of them. Pour one out for the homies. All right. Today we are highlighting Hood River Distillers. So Hood River Distillers is from Hood River, Oregon, and it is actually like a consortium of multiple distilleries in the town of Hood River. So there's 2 distilleries. One is called Clear Creek Distillers, and the other one is called Big Gin Distillery. And then they kind of like lump themselves together, and they offer their whole portfolio as Hood River Distillers. So the whiskeys that we're drinking today both come from Clear Creek Distillery, or they're at least marketed by them. So we have 3 bourbons and 2 single malts from Hood River. I cannot freaking wait to get into these, Brad, because they won gold or double gold at San Francisco. We've been hanging on to them since before our San Francisco World Spirits episode because I've been so pumped for you to try, especially these American single malts. I really, really cannot wait to get into drinking these.
Yeah, I am really excited, Bob. Anytime a company is willing to send us 5 different samples of their liquor, I'm along for the ride, man. This is going to be a good time.
So we're drinking 2 kinds of whiskey, and they have 2 different brand names, right? So the bourbons that we're drinking are bottled under the brand name Trail's End, and the single malts that we're drinking are distilled at Clear Creek Distillery, and they are bottled under the name McCarthy's Single Malt. So I think today, Brad, what we'll do is we'll start with these 3 bourbons that come from Trail's End. These are all Kentucky bourbon whiskeys, so they're sourced whiskey that is then finished in Oregon. And the first one we're going to be trying is the Trail's End 8-year Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey, which is finished in Oregon oak. And Brad, as we get into drinking these 3 bourbons, why don't you let our listeners in on what we're actually going to be talking about as we drink today?
Yeah, we had a great question come in from one of our patrons, known as, on our Discord, The Favorite Canadian. And he asked us if we had an opportunity to, take a mentor to teach us filmmaking, who would we choose as our mentor? Like who would we want to sit at the feet of and glean as much wisdom as they could possibly give us on the art of making a movie? And honestly, Bob, I was like, that's a really good question. I am excited to talk about that.
Well, and I think it says a lot about ourselves, even more than the filmmaker we choose, because, you could say Spielberg, you could say Scorsese, and they're 2 very different kinds of filmmakers. And I think in a lot of ways, when I think about myself making a movie, the first question I have is like, what am I really good at? And what do I think I could actually make well or do well as a director? And what would I really need coached at? And I think the part where I would really need coached is where I'd be thinking, okay, what filmmaker is really good at doing that thing and could teach me a lot about that?
Yeah,
so yeah, man,
you're already at the peak at the things you're good at, so you just want to shore up some weaknesses as a filmmaker.
Well, I mean, I think about Quentin Tarantino and how he was just an extensive movie nerd. All he did was watch movies all the time to the point where he developed this encyclopedic knowledge of movies. And I wonder, where did he go to finishing school? You know what I mean? How did he actually get the know-how of the technical side of things? Because the images were already in his head. And so that's kind of what I'm thinking about today is like,
Yeah.
if you're Tarantino, what are the things that you're already good at, Brad G? And what things would you need to actually get some hands-on training at? All right, so I will say that the question that came in from the favorite Canadian, it actually specified too that the filmmaker be somebody that we are profiling this season. So if you're not familiar with our podcast, or if this is your first time, this season of our show, we are looking at 3 to 4 films from a collection of different directors. And so we'll spend a few weeks with each director and then move on to the next one. Real quick, Brad, I'll just give a rundown of who our directors are for the season, and then we'll go from there. So first, we looked at 4 films from Steven Spielberg. We just wrapped up 3 weeks with Martin Scorsese. We are in the middle of 3 weeks with Edgar Wright. We're going to pivot to a series on Wes Anderson. Then we're throwing it way back to classic Hollywood with John Ford. We're going to look at 3 films from Rob Reiner before going back again to classic film with David Lean. We're bringing it back in time for the new Avatar movie to look at 4 movies from James Cameron. We're going to finish out our picks with the Coen brothers, and then we're offering 4 filmmakers to our listeners to pick for our final mini-series of the season. I will say, I think because those 4 filmmakers are up in the air, we probably shouldn't consider them unless you really want to, Brad. But
yeah, no, we can leave them off.
Yeah, I think we have 9 to choose from otherwise. And it's like, all right, if you really want to be like, no, I don't want to learn from the Coen brothers. I need to learn from Michael Mann instead. It's like, okay, dude. You know what I mean?
Go for it.
Right. Okay, so as we dwell on who we would learn at the feet of, let's get into this first whiskey from Trail's End. This is that 8-year finished in Oregon oak. Brad, what do you think of this one?
Yeah, it's coming in at 90 proof, and you can kind of tell on the nose it's not an extremely hot whiskey. But yeah, honestly, this is like a really nice classic bourbon nose. There's some caramel, oak, vanilla, and then I got a little bit of like popcorn butter.
Mm-hmm.
And really liked the sweetness that's going on, but there's like a depth to the sweetness that is really impressive, and I really like.
Yeah, I think that's a really good word for it with depth, because it's a very standard bourbon nose. There's really no peaks or valleys here. There's nothing interesting that makes you kind of cock your head to the side and say, I haven't smelled that before. It just smells like a really solid all-around bourbon, but then you can tell with the intensity of those aromas that this has been aged for longer. Even though it's been diluted down to 90 proof, the fact that this is an 8-year bourbon is really, really apparent in the glass.
Yeah, and I think as you get into the palate and the taste, it's just really beautiful. There's some vanilla, there's caramel, there's citrus going on. I am really enjoying the palate. It's not like near the top tier of whiskey I've ever had. But man, is it impressive.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you, man. I think that the nose was a little bit better on this one for me than the taste and the finish were. It's a little bit thin and it's a little bit too oaky for me. There's like some really almost bitter notes on this towards the end. And the alcohol actually really announces itself for me on the finish here. But overall, on the balance of things, I think, if we were scoring this out in the 4 categories, since we're not including price, I would say it's like an 8.5 on the nose, and then probably like 6 to 6.5 on all the other categories for me. It's a really solid place to start this tasting, but I'm a little more excited for the other 2 bourbons in this lineup than I was for this one.
I'm just going to let you know, man, because we always score out of 50, I just kind of give these general scores out of 50 because that's easier for my brain to comprehend. The finish for me here had like a little bit of an oatmeal cookie vibe going on, and I was a pretty big fan of. If I had to score it out of 50, I'd probably be right around like a 33, 34 out of 50. It's just a really nice, solid expression of a classic bourbon.
Yeah, that's exactly where I am. Like I'm at a 26.5 out of 40, and when you do all the math, I'm coming out to a 33 out of 50 on this. A good place to start, maybe just a hair below where we would start recommending it. But again, I think we're off to a really good start here, Brad.
Yeah, I think so too. And I've been thinking as we've been talking about this directorial decision, can we just throw out Scorsese and Spielberg because of how famous they are? Can we keep this as a competition between everyone else?
Oh, good question.
Because I feel like there's a place where if you were given the opportunity genuinely to pick between all of these, and you didn't pick Scorsese or Spielberg, that like Scorsese would send a mafia hit on you, like no doubt. And Spielberg would go and make a movie about how sad he is regarding it. And
True.
It would just be terrible.
True.
So I like, does it feel like they would be an obvious pick for obvious reasons? So we can almost like set them to the side and be like, yep, you guys are special and beyond everyone else. And we're just going to choose from among the rest of the peasants.
I think that's fair. But as we push them aside into the fiery furnace here, which one, if you had to pick one that would be like your go-to, who would you pick of those two?
I think I would pick Spielberg.
I do too.
Because Scorsese, like, ooh, this is about to get into hot take territory. Hit the hot take button, Bob. I think that Scorsese is kind of a one-note director.
No, come on, dude. That's not true.
He always, in the sense that he always just has like a one big point he tries to make, and he hits you with it over the head in the final scene. And he's like, do you get it? Do you get the message I'm trying to send you?
I mean, you could say that Spielberg's only had one theme for his whole career, if you want to do that. And that's like, I miss you, daddy. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, you know.
And I love Spielberg. I'm just saying, like, I think you're oversimplifying Scorsese a bit. For me, I would pick Spielberg because of his camera know-how. Like, the Spielberg oneer is a thing for a reason. And the way that guy, and you know, the funny thing about it is because Spielberg and Scorsese kind of came up through the ranks together and they hung out so much back in the day, there is a wealth of interviews where Scorsese talks about Spielberg and Spielberg talks about Scorsese. And I just came across this article where Scorsese was talking about Spielberg's kind of like preternatural ability to walk into a room and look around and see the room from the camera's eye and be like, all right, I need a camera in that corner. I need a camera right here on the ground. And I need a camera over here. And this one's going to be on a dolly. And that's how we're going to move this around. And he just knows exactly how to frame a space in camera. And it's like this God-given ability that he has. And when I think about my own, like, what would I really, really need to drill down on to be a good director? I think Spielberg has that even more than Scorsese does.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think the main reason I'd go to Spielberg is because of his mastery of the camera, and just I just love his cinematography.
For sure.
And so, yeah, Spielberg would be the overall choice, which I think by saying that at the outset here, I think it gives us an easier opportunity to just debate about like why we would want any of these other directors who aren't Spielberg.
Well, as we have teased that, let's try these last two bourbons, and then we'll come back and one of us can give our pick, and then the other one can.
Sounds good.
So the next one we're going to try is from Trail's End. It is also an 8-year bourbon. This one is finished in apple brandy barrels. Now, we've tried apple brandy finishes before, notably from Watershed Distillery here in Ohio. That one is a 4-year whiskey. They did do a special release, I believe, of a 6-year that was finished in apple brandy as well. This one's an 8-year bourbon finished in apple brandy barrels. And dude, I got to say, this is, even though that first one was good, this is a huge step up from that one for me.
That's interesting, Bob. I don't know if I would say that. I think that this one like really strongly takes on the green apple notes, almost to the detriment of what was going on with the original expression.
Wow. So this one, I will say also, is 105 proof versus the 90 proof of the first one.
Mm-hmm.
One of the most interesting things for me was that this didn't have a ton of apple going on for me. It was almost all black cherry, and I know that it was picking up those notes from the apple brandy barrels, but I was expecting more of like a red apple peel. If there is apple here, I agree with you, Brad. It tastes more like a Granny Smith apple than it does like a Red Delicious or something like that.
Yeah, and that's for me. There was almost just a little bit of that tart kind of sour flavor that you get with a really strong Granny Smith green apple feel. That for me, I'll just say through, like, yes, there was some caramel, I almost got a little bit of a clove spice halfway through. It's oaky in the finish. But overall, I just got a lot of tart green apple. And I wasn't super impressed.
This definitely still doesn't tip into being very sweet on the palate. There was a lot more black pepper for me than there was on the first one. The apple finally does present itself for me on the finish. I liked this a lot, Brad, and I can tell that you didn't, but I'm coming out to like a 37.5 out of 50 on this one if we're going to use our 50-point metric here.
Yeah, I think I can tell that it is well made. Like this isn't a low quality whiskey by any stretch of the imagination. It's just not my cup of tea. I think I'd give it like a 31 out of 50.
Wow. All right. I'm surprised we were so divided on that one. Do you remember what you thought of the watershed, the apple brandy watershed?
It's fine.
Maybe it's the apple brandy thing. Maybe that's what you don't like here.
Yeah, honestly, I think that might be it. I like Watershed's product. It's improved a lot in the recent years. I think that apple brandy just gives it a little bit of a twist that I don't really enjoy.
I totally get that. There's certain finishes on scotches that we try that every time we hit, whatever that spirit might be, I'm like, do we have to drink another one of those? Like, yep. I totally get it. Especially when you start getting into finished whiskey, there are definite flavor wheelhouses.
Yeah. For sure. But I will say this 10-year bourbon I really liked.
Me too, man. So the last one from Trail's End is this 10-year Kentucky straight bourbon that is finished in Oregon oak, and it is 105 proof. So it's kind of the best of both worlds of the first two that we tried. And I think it's kind of a no-brainer that this is the best of the three.
Yeah, this one for me had some really nice, almost like an orangey dark chocolate feel to it on the nose. Along with some caramel, and this one definitely gave me some brown sugar notes that I was like, oh, this is like rich. There's a little bit of citrus going on, some chocolate. I really enjoyed the nose on this.
Yeah, me too, man. This it has, again, that kind of standard bourbon nose, but the heat from that increased proof point is present, like even from the nosing on this, where you're like, oh, this is going to be like, I'm in the big boy leagues here now.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I really love it. It's just that bottling it at 105 proof, I think, was the best thing they could do here. If this was 90 proof, I think it really would have undercut a lot of the complexity that's going on here.
Yeah, and I think that as you get into the taste and the finish here, man, there was some cheesecake going on. It was nice and creamy. There's orange. There's a little bit of mint happening for me.
Yeah.
And then on the back end, there's some caramel and oak. The minty orange flavors kind of mixed for me in the finish and got a little sour.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like the only negative note I had on it. But honestly, this was a really beautiful expression coming out of Trail's End and Hood River. I think I'd probably end up at like a 38, 39 out of 50 on this.
That's about where I am too. And our notes are almost identical here. On the finish, I wrote, it's like bitter mint. It's almost a menthol kind of thing going on. For me, I was really shocked that it took on that minty quality, and then after I swallowed and kind of let it sit on my palate for about a minute, it almost had like a black licorice kind of thing going on too, which is, neither of those are things we usually get on bourbons. I've heard us say both of those things before about ryes. So this is a very interesting, and I have to imagine it's the influence of that, the Oregon oak casks that they're finishing this in, because it has an almost like woodsy, piney thing going on to it as well. I really like this. I would highly recommend this one.
Yeah. And I'll just say this for a second, just so everybody knows, if you didn't know this already, Bob and I live 2 hours apart. We do not drink the whiskey together except on very rare, wonderful occasions. And it's like super affirming as a whiskey taster to hear somebody else be like, yep, I got the exact same thing.
Yeah.
There's that little party that's like, ooh, man, I'm doing this right.
I don't have imposter syndrome as much.
Yeah, it's helpful.
All right, man. Do you want to go first answering this big glaring question here?
Yeah, I've been kind of browsing the rest of our directors. There's a part of me that wants to say I really like Bridge on the River Kwai. I know how famous Lawrence of Arabia is, and you've been raving about Brief Encounter. There's part of me that wants to go really old school with David Lean. But there's part of me that wants to go with Rob Reiner. Like, he, to me, feels like he's a chameleon. He can do almost anything. Like, he goes, Princess Bride into A Few Good Men. Like, that's just crazy to me. I don't think I would want to learn from Wes Anderson. Like, he's just unique and odd, and it would be a fascinating time, I have no doubt, to hang out with him. The Coen brothers are just dark, and I think I might, like, just have an existential crisis if I hung out with them for too long. Bob, I'm kind of between Edgar Wright and David Lean, which might be the two, like, furthest ends of the spectrum of what we are watching this season.
It's like extreme patience versus extreme hyperactivity.
Yeah. And maybe that's why I'm drawn to both of them, is because they're so different. I don't know. What you give me your thoughts between the two, and maybe then I'll make my decision.
This is really hard to do without having watched all the movies yet, Yeah. I think for me, I would probably lean towards Lean, and that's
Lean squared.
And that's partially because, again, David Lean didn't have like the visual effects elements that we have now, and so you watch Bridge on the River Kwai, and it's all real extras doing this stuff. And same thing with Lawrence of Arabia. The scale of what David Lean did is incredible. And Lawrence of Arabia is the most beautiful movie I've ever seen in terms of the cinematography. I cannot wait for you to watch that movie. Edgar Wright's movies are, and this is not a knock against him, I think in a lot of ways they're made in the edit. You know what I mean? Like, the editing of those movies is so vital to the way those movies work. And that is a reflection of Edgar Wright, too. Like, he's really, really good at knowing exactly what kind of rhythm his movies should have. And that's especially true with Baby Driver. Like, everything's happening on the beat to the music in Baby Driver. So they're very different kinds of filmmakers, but I think if you're trying to get, like, how to make a movie with a camera and nothing else, like, David Lean is your guy.
I think I'm with you, man. I think I'd go with David Lean. I do love the way you talk about the rhythm of Edgar Wright. I think he is one of the greatest rhythmic directors that I've ever watched. And if I wanted to learn more about post-production, I think I would choose Edgar Wright. But man, I know almost nothing about making a movie. And so I think I'm with you, man. David Lean is my choice.
All right, man. Let's go ahead and drink these two single malts. And then we'll come back and we'll talk about my pick, because I still haven't decided yet. So I need time to hem and haw.
I love the way you said that. We'll just come back and talk about whatever I want to do. It almost had a little bit of a Christopher Walken vibe to it.
I got a fever. And the only prescription is more whiskey.
I've been carrying this cold watch.
All right. So the first of these two single malts from the brand called McCarthy's is the McCarthy's pot distilled whiskey. This is aged for 3 years in Oregon oak, distilled at Clear Creek Distillery in Hood River. Man, this thing... Go ahead.
Can I just say that, like, Americans are idiots? Like, our flagship version of whiskey takes, like, 8 to 10 to 12 years to make. And I know that scotches are, like, all 16 and up. But, like, the fact that they can make this pot still whiskey in 3 years and it's so damn good.
Yeah, dude.
I'm like, you can make scotch that's really young and it's phenomenal. You can make scotch that's really old and it's phenomenal. And they just have something over on us, I think.
I agree. I agree. And, like, scotch isn't even my favorite kind of whiskey, but then I drink this American single malt and I'm like, you can't make a 3-year bourbon that tastes this good. You just can't.
No, you can't, man. It's crazy.
All right, so I have been waiting for you to try these for months now, and I've been hyping them up and then kind of just like letting it die on the vine a little bit because I don't want to overhype you. But I haven't heard what you think of these. So let's talk about the 3-year one first. I really want to hear your thoughts, Brad.
Yeah, this one comes in at 85 proof. The nose is like you get a lot of that malted barley. You get some sweet orange, some fresh parsley. And then you move into the palate. For me, it was the first whiskey I've ever had where I like took a sip and was like, oh, carrot.
Huh.
Like there was some vegetal flavoring going on, but I immediately was like, yep, that's carrot. I don't know why, but it's carrot.
Interesting.
And then on the finish, I got some like sweet mint and barley. My overall experience, this is going to get a little ethereal here, Bob. It was just a really like calm, soothing, refreshing experience of a whiskey.
I like it. I thought you were going to get even more ethereal and be like, you know, I was on the astral plane and I saw my ancestors. And one of the things I love about single malts is that they can bottle something at 85 proof and it has a punch to the alcohol and it is deep and complex and it doesn't seem like they're cutting corners. When bourbon is bottled at 80 to 90 proof, I'm usually just like, oh, they're trying to stretch this liquid as far as they can and price gouge me. And that is not at all the impression that I have ever gotten with any kind of scotch or single malt, including this one. Like, the note that I took on the nose was peat and sweet. Like, it smells like that great Scottish peat that we love, but it has this very unique sweetness to it that I couldn't quite pin down at first. It reminded me a lot of Lay's mesquite barbecue potato chips. Like, it was like barbecue potato chips. And then there was something
for like classic or oven baked.
I don't know. Who does oven baked? Come on. Listen, if you're going to eat a potato chip, just be real with yourself. Like you're eating a piece of fried potato.
Hey man,
just
you're the one with the beatus. I'm just seeing if you're eating healthy. So
that's true.
Sorry that I care, Bob.
Yeah, that's true. There is some sugariness to it. I get a little bit of that pininess again on the nose. It's this really great mashup of things that I've never experienced together on a nose before. And I really like your note of carrot on the taste because, once again, it's one of those weirdly sweet notes that I can't quite pin down what the sweetness is. And so I can't quite say that I remember it tasting like a carrot, but I'm not opposed to that. You know what I'm saying?
Dude, this is just a part of my personal life. Haley would always like berate me, not actually berate me, but she'd always be like, how do you not like carrots? They're so sweet. And I'm like, what are you talking about? It's a vegetable. Like, vegetables can't be sweet. And like, as I've gotten older, I've come around and I'm like, oh yeah, like carrots are like kind of sweet.
They're pretty sweet. Yeah, for sure.
I was just like flabbergasted the first time she said that though, because I did not grow up in a home where carrots were considered something sweet.
Let's eat a sweet treat. And your mom just busts out the baby carrots.
Exactly.
All right, if you had to score this one out of 50, Brad, where do you think you'd be?
I think I'd be, It's very nice and gentle, and I enjoy it. There's nothing that, like, punches me in the face with, oh my God, this is amazing. I think I'd be at, like, a 38 out of 50.
Yeah, I'm really close to you. I think I'd be right around a 40. Like, this is really, really good. I think I might be just a bit overinflating how good it is because it's an American single malt. And I haven't had a lot of American single malts that I thought were anything more than very good.
Yeah.
But this is really unique. And I think this is the kind of thing that, like, is it as good as my favorite scotches? Probably not. But it's something that I would take to that tasting and say, like, this is what can be unique about American single malt.
Yep. Yeah, I am with you 100%. And then you jump into this 6-year single malt from McCarthy's that is 100 proof. And Bob, like, jumping up on the proof point here was a phenomenal choice, in my opinion.
Absolutely, man. The nose is interesting again to me because I got a note that I've never gotten before. And again, I feel like I need to preface it because this is going to sound like a negative thing. I think sometimes you just, like, you pick out notes and you're not saying that it smells bad. You're just trying to be accurate with, like, what it reflects back to you. And that has nothing to do with how the thing tastes. I got a whiff of, like fresh out of the box plastic. You know what I mean? Like when you like if you've ever built anything for your toddler that comes from like Little Tykes or something, and you just like crack open the box and it has that like fresh off the assembly line, full of BPA plastic. Like that's going on here for me. You
know what I learned the other day, Bob?
What's that?
Little Tykes, headquartered in Hudson, Ohio.
Yeah.
I had literally no idea. I also didn't know that they put their plastic into whiskey. So good on Hood River.
The microplastics are everywhere, man.
Yeah, I love getting into the whiskey world because you have moments like that where if you're talking to non-whiskey drinkers, you're like, no, I promise. It tastes like plastic and it's a good thing.
And they're like, oh, you're an alcoholic. Got it.
Yeah, because like in the end, Bob, I think what you're describing is not necessarily the fact that plastic tastes good. It's that there are good memories associated with like opening up things that are made of plastic.
Yeah, I mean, it's like...
Does that make sense?
Yes. Like, and again, it was more on the nose than the taste. I didn't get it on the taste. But like, people love the smell of old books. People love the smell of pipe tobacco. People love the smell of gasoline. That doesn't mean that you want to consume those things. Right. But just to say like, oh, this has like that note of gasoline on it. I understand that it would turn you off from wanting to drink it, but that doesn't mean it's a poorly made whiskey. In fact, I think it's actually a really interesting thing because you never get that on whiskeys.
Yeah, I think that this 6 year, for me, it had like some caramel apple things going on, but with like a lot more apple than caramel. And then like getting into the palate, there's that apple going on with like some mint and dill and all sorts of just really nice seasoning type of flavors. And then the finish just sat on my palate for a really long time. I think that's where those extra proof points kind of chilled for a while, was on the finish.
Yeah.
Man, this is a really complex whiskey compared to the 3 year, and I liked the 3 year. I'm probably coming out at like a 43 out of 50.
Yeah, I'm definitely at least a 40 on this one. And I think the lineup of all five was really, really great to me. I think the lowest I came out on any of them was the very first 8-year bourbon we tried, which I still think I'd be above a 30 on. So Hood River, like, I cannot say thank you enough because, Brad, I don't think you've actually seen the full-sized bottles that they've sent us. But, I mean, next time we get together, I'm going to have to bring a bottle down and we're going to have to, like, drink copious amounts of this stuff because I have so much whiskey from them in my house right now. But all of it's good. And that's part of why I wanted to devote a whole episode to them, because it's very rare that we get this many samples from a distillery, and they're all, I mean, at least unique, but all actually good.
Yeah. No, you can tell that Hood River is putting out some wildly good whiskey that is really made at a high quality. And I'm just super thankful that they sent it out. So Hood River, you're killing it out there. Keep up the great work, and we are going to continue to be your biggest fans.
Absolutely. All right, man, let's finish this conversation out. As I look over this list, I think that there is one clear choice. Since we've ruled out Scorsese and we've ruled out Spielberg, and that to me is James Cameron, who is a director that
really
I don't think gets the credit he deserves as a director. And no matter how many YouTube videos people watch where you know, Patrick Willems or whoever says James Cameron is a genius, people just don't give him that credit. And I go back and watch a movie like Titanic every now and then, and I'm like, how do people come away from Titanic such a simplistic reading of, oh, this is a movie with 2 movie stars and it's a big budget disaster movie and it's nothing more than that? Because that movie is so expertly crafted and there is so much technical know-how going on behind that camera that I'm like, I don't understand how James Cameron isn't revered in the same breath as someone like Spielberg sometimes. And I think for me, the thing that links the two of them together is that they both started out making horror movies. And because they're so good at knowing what truly terrifies audiences, they can leverage that, and they can make a suspenseful movie. They can make a rousing adventure picture. When Titanic stops being this sappy romance and tips into disaster movie, it becomes a great movie. And you have that, for me, the moment that Titanic really clicks into being a 10 out of 10 is when Jack and Rose are below deck, and I think Rose has just like used the axe to cut Jack's handcuffs off of him, and they're walking through the hallway that is like up to their chest in water, and then the lights start to flicker, and you start to hear the creaking and groaning of the steel in that ship as it's about to give way. And that's the moment where, for me, everything just turns into like, oh crap, this is about to get really, really bad. And there are very few filmmakers who can work on the scale of a David Lean, but with the, the suspense and the horror elements of a Hitchcock or a Spielberg. And I think James Cameron does both of those just so well.
Yeah, honestly, Bob, I completely dismissed James Cameron from the list. Like, he's just not somebody I'm interested in learning movies from. And you've talked him up so many times, and, we've done Alien and Titanic on the podcast, both movies that I really liked. But for some reason, he just has never struck me as a director that I'm like, oh yeah, top tier, A-list type of director. So I'm curious to get into his movies.
Yeah,
I'm excited to watch Terminator and T2 and definitely excited for Avatar.
Well, if I can correct you in real time, we watched Alien, but that's a Ridley Scott movie.
Oh,
like James Cameron had nothing to do with that. He did the sequel Aliens, which we're going to watch this season in that mini marathon. So yeah, dude, I'm really excited to watch those movies alongside you and see how those kind of directorial elements and flourishes come up. So what a great question. This makes me even more excited to continue on this season 6 journey with you.
Yeah, super pumped for it, man. But until then, go out and buy yourself some Hood River whiskey, because they're just knocking it out of the park.
All right, Brad, it's time for us to throw over to our interview with the head distiller from Hood River, Joe O'Sullivan. We finally get somebody to thank for all of these great whiskeys, so let's give that a listen. All right, Brad, we're here joined by Joe O'Sullivan, who is the master distiller for Hood River Distillers. Joe, we have just finished drinking through 5 different whiskeys made by your company. So first of all, thank you for the buzz. It's been a really good one. But on top of that, man, we tried these as we were planning out the episode and just kind of said we have to get somebody from the distillery on to talk with us because we need someone to heap praise upon. And Brad, I don't think that I'm out of line here saying, especially these 2 single malts are probably the best American single malts we've ever had on the show.
Easily. Yeah. Like we said, the bourbons that they're making are really impressive, but these single malts, Joe, you guys are just slapping out in Oregon.
I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. The McCarthy's has been in my life for almost 20 years now, and it means the world to me. So it's kind of finding its audience in the last year or two has been just worth all of the struggle and all the times that I've tried to convince people that American single malt can be as good as any other nations.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. What is your history in the industry? How did you get to be the master distiller?
Luck. I think everyone forgets that that's the key to success is just luck and being in the right place, right time. I'm from Massachusetts. And I was traveling around the country, living in different places. Boise, Idaho wasn't for me. And then we moved out, me and the woman I was seeing at the time, we moved out to Portland in 2004. And I needed a job. And I had some carpentry experience. I have a science degree, but I wasn't really looking to try to make money off that right away. It usually takes some time to find those jobs. So I was just looking for a job, hammering nails, basically. And knocked on a door, and this very ornery, tall, skinny giant named Steve McCarthy answered the door, and he said, "This is Clear Creek Distillery. Drop off your application." And I for a moment, I thought, well, this will be fun, and it'll be kind of an interesting resume patter, and I'll do this for a little while and see what happens. Yeah. But he hired me on in 2005 as a guy who could fix barrels, as he said. I don't really care about your biology degree. I can see that you can swing a hammer, and that's all that matters to me, because Steve was a fantastic distiller. He's retired now. Steve was a fantastic distiller, but he was a terrible, terrible cooper. We still had some of his barrels that he tried to put back together again after repairs, and they're comically all over the place. So I lied to him and told him I knew how to fix barrels, and I've been working as a distiller ever since.
Man, what a story. So Here's the thing. When we first started trying to research out McCarthy's a little bit, I'm going to be honest, we hadn't really heard of McCarthy's until San Francisco happened and you guys won double gold there. And that immediately put you on our radar. And I started looking for, okay, where's McCarthy's located? And come to find out, okay, it's a brand name that is attached to Hood River Distillers. All right, well, let me look up Hood River Distillers. And then I find out that Hood River Distillers is actually multiple distilleries that kind of seems to be working together as like a consortium. Can you break that down a little bit for me?
Yeah. So it's a really interesting history. Hood River Distillers was started in 1934 by a couple of families out here in Hood River. And it was the first distillery post-prohibition. And for the very beginning of their history, they were making really interesting apple and fruit brandies from the Pacific Northwest. But once cold storage came into play, the resource of cheap apples kind of diminished. And as a result, they moved into value branded products. And they're largely known across the Northwest for their Hood River vodka. So if you talk to anybody in the Northwest and you say HRD vodka, they're going to tell you the story of the worst night of their life, but they'll have the biggest smile on their face. And I really embrace that sort of history because that to me is amazing that you can give people that number many people, that many stories. But in the 2000s, they started looking at returning to their roots. And Clear Creek Distillery, which started in 1985, started in Portland, Oregon as the third craft distillery in America. It was Germain Robin, St. George, and Clear Creek.
Wow.
It was founded by Steve McCarthy.
Okay.
And Steve was looking to retire. His daughter, she's a biologist and she didn't really want to leave her career. So they sold the business, or Steve sold the business to Ron Dodge, who owns Hood River Distillers. And we've been working for and with them ever since. In the meantime, they've picked up what used to be known as Captive Spirits and is now known as Big Gin Distillery in Seattle. And there's some minor associations with a few other distilleries across the Northwest. But it's essentially what you said. It's a group of craft distillers plus this flagship larger value brand that we're all working together. And what's really neat about it is that it's still owned by a small family here in Hood River. It's still owned by the Dodge family, and they all work in the company. They all are very dedicated to the brands, and it has a very small feel. And so while we may be on paper what is thought of as the largest distillery in the Northwest, we actually have some of the smallest amount of capital when it comes to some of the other brands in the Northwest, because we're not attached to any of the big Diageos or Proximos or any of those larger corporations.
Yeah.
It's still just small and family owned.
Yeah. And it seems like with, like you said, you don't have the capital of the capital B billion-dollar industry in a sense. There's a place where you want to focus on what you really care about, right? And so I think that you can kind of see that a little bit in just where you guys are making your whiskey. And, we're sourcing some bourbon and doing stuff with it and making a good product. But you guys are like 100% from the start making your own single malt. And I think that's like a pretty cool deal. Like, what do you think caused you to focus on the area of an American single malt?
Well, it's really interesting because McCarthy's single malt was a Clear Creek brand initially. And since then, we all have to be aware that all of this is Hood River Distillers. It took a couple of years, I think, for us to find ourselves within the family. But I was talking to one of the marketing leads this morning and saying, really feels like we're all together now and how great that is. And McCarthy's wasn't started by Hood River Distillers, but was started by Clear Creek in the pre-Hood River Distillers days. And it was really on this. So Steve McCarthy went to Ireland, and I don't know what he was expecting, but he was surprised to find it was raining. And while he was there, he got to taste, this is in the late 80s, he got to taste a lot of single malt scotches. And at that time, the concepts of the diversity of scotch wasn't really something that the American consumer understood or knew about. But he was early on to really get excited about this idea of terroir, this idea of regionality, because everything he had done had been a reflection of the Northwest. And so when he wanted to do this, he said, I'm going to make an American single malt, something that reflects the terroir of America. And I'm going to use barley from Oregon, and I'm going to get it peated with Washington peat, and then I'm going to age it in Oregon oak barrels. And only one of those things happened, because the truth of the matter is there was no malting houses when he first designed this that were willing to deal with peat in America. Mm-hmm. And because the peat reek getting into the equipment never really comes out.
Sure.
Since then, there are some. There's Skagit Valley Malt in Washington, who are fantastic and good friends of ours and wonderful people. But we've stuck with the original recipe, which is actually getting our barley malted in Scotland, in Port Ellen, sent to us here in the Northwest, where it's mash fermented and then turned into a single malt whiskey, which we still actually use Oregon oak, Garyana oak barrels for, which are all made right in McMinnville by Oregon Barrel Works.
Well, I mean, it's pretty obvious that you guys are putting an incredible amount of labor and craft into this, and I think it's paying dividends, at least on our palate right now. But like I said, we first kind of discovered the brand through reading through the list of the double gold winners at San Francisco. And, you know, we've talked with a lot of winners over the years since we've started doing this podcast, and especially for craft brands, it seems to be something that's really appreciated. When you look at, you know, the landscape of your sales and your footprint, what does winning a double gold kind of do for the brand?
Well, I'll tell you, there's awards that all awards are important. There's never going to be an award that we don't feel honored to get and put up on our Instagram and keep our little medals. But a double gold at San Francisco it's a different thing. Mm-hmm. And it's validation, and it's confirmation that all of your efforts are worth it. And when you get that response, when you get those critiques, when double gold is a big deal, that means every single judge awarded it gold.
Yeah.
Nobody found a fault with it. And to get that sort of thing from such a reputable competition you fly high for the next 2 weeks. You just can't help it. You feel that all of the imposter syndrome that you deal with every day, because I think we can all readily admit that we all deal with that, is maybe just exactly, and it's not real. And to me, that's what those awards can do on a personal level. From a brand perspective, it gets you attention. Yeah. And then you can actually talk to people about what you're doing, and you start to see that maybe this weird idea that you had to do a barley focused single malt back in the 90s is starting to resonate now. And even though that was a time where it was always just bourbon, it's proof that the American distilling scene can be as good and as powerful as any other countries. Mm-hmm. That to me is worth its weight in gold. And to be part of the collection of distillers that are representing this country so well gives me a lot of pleasure and a lot of humility.
You're going to have to forgive me for making a complete jump to movies here, but that's what I do. And your story reminds me so much of, there's a movie that came out, I don't know, a dozen years ago or so, called Bottle Shock. I don't know if you've ever seen this movie. And it was
didn't, but other people told me about it. I do want to see it.
It was all about the scene in Napa in the 70s when they were kind of first discovered by a wine judge who then kind of did this huge publicity stunt, you know, in France, and did a double blind tasting, and all of the Napa wines won. And it was the first time anyone took California wine seriously. And I'm just kind of wondering, like, have you experienced that a little bit with McCarthy's? Like, do you find that the world of Scotch is more welcoming in general to American single malt, or, you know, do you see the respect coming even from across the pond now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think initially, I will tell you, though, that the first international respect we received didn't come from across the Atlantic, but across the Pacific. The interest that we've seen in McCarthy's out of Japan and Korea has been phenomenal. And I wish we had gone back in time and produced more for now, so we could fulfill these orders that we want to place on an international basis. I really think that the European approach to single malt and American single malt specifically is going to go off without a hitch. Because the one thing that connoisseurs and aficionados and members of whiskey lodges across the world all agree on is that it's the heart that you put into it, and it's the intention that you have, not necessarily the nationality around it. Because for all of the good spirits that are produced in your own country, we all know that there's ones just right down the road that don't really hold up, to what you want it to be anymore either.
Yeah, Joe, it's absolutely impressive what you guys are doing. And I'll just flat out ask it, man. What movies have you been watching lately? What's been getting you going?
Oh, well, we're getting into Halloween season. I that is my holiday. I want to do Halloween cards every year. I decorate my house really ridiculous. So I'm basically polishing up my Shudder membership pretty aggressively right now. The last movie I watched was Glorious, which was pretty great on that. Saint Maud was really, really good as well.
Oh, that's a heavy one, man.
Yeah, no, I don't typically go too light. So those have been really, really great. Every year I do rewatch one of my favorite movies, which I mentioned off recording to you all, which is The Third Man, the Carol Reed film. So that's a absolute regular. It's probably going to be coming up. I usually do that one around Thanksgiving. So those are three that I've been really, really into right now.
We have not done The Third Man on this show yet. And so when we get around to it, I might have to tap you as a guest host if you're willing to come on and drink whiskey and talk about The Third Man with us.
I could talk about The Third Man for a long, long time. I mean, how it's Joseph Cotten, it's Orson Welles, it's Carol Reed, it's got Cuckoo one of the clocks. Greatest. It's the Cuckoo clock speech, the Anton Vargas zither music. It's just the best. Not to mention, it's one of the most harshest takedowns of human morality in film in a movie that's genuinely very funny.
It's just such a great movie. Yeah, for sure, man. All right, Joe, before we let you go today, can you tell us what's coming down the pike here? What's next for Hood River and McCarthy's?
All right, so big news. We just today bottled our Pedro Jimenez PX finished 6-year McCarthy's. It's I'm going to be flat honest with you. It's me and my head distiller, Caitlin Bartlemay, who I got to give a shout out to because she's great. We think it's the best thing that we've ever done. So in 18 years of making McCarthy's, this is going to be my own personal favorite release. And then short of that, we're always playing around with specialty barrels and single barrels. So if you live in the Northwest and you got a local liquor store, see if they got some sort of single barrel program going with us, because it might be something really cool. It might be a gin finish. It might be a rum finish. You never know.
Joe, we cannot thank you enough, man. And I mean it when we say Brad and I have been raving about this stuff to each other. We'll just send texts at random times of day and say, hey, remember that 6-year McCarthy's we just had?
Dude, constantly.
It's so good. And, it's not often that we meet someone and then 15 minutes later are inviting them to guest host on the show. But listen, if your knowledge of The Third Man is anywhere near your knowledge of how to make single malt, you are welcome back anytime on this show.
At all points.
I think my knowledge of Graham Greene novels and films based on his stories is even bigger than my knowledge of single malt. So yeah, have me on. I'd love it.
All right,
come by the distillery if you guys are ever in town.
I'll tell you what, man. You ever want to fly us out? We're game. We're all right. We will always
ready.
Come.
Oh yeah, I got that in my budget.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. This has been Joe O'Sullivan from Hood River Distillers. We will be back on Monday with another regularly scheduled episode. But until then, I'm Bob Book.
I'm Brad G.
And we'll see you next time.